Hello, and a huge welcome to this side event today on the fringes of the 66th session of the Commission on the Status of Women. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are joining us from. We're really pleased that you're here for this discussion, and a huge welcome. I'm so excited to be here today. I first attended CSW in New York 10 years ago now, I've just realized, in 2012. And it's always a privilege and an honor to gather with women's rights advocates and allies from across geographies and cultures and professional backgrounds, as we look to take the time to collectively take stock on the key issues on the road to gender equality and women and girls empowerment. Now, the theme of this year's CSW is focused on the critical issue facing all of us on how we ensure that women and girls are at the very heart of decisions and investments and actions in the context of efforts to address climate change and environmental and disaster risk reduction policies and programs. Today's discussion, we're going to specifically focus on the role of pre-agreed disaster finance and why it's critical that women's rights advocates lean into influencing and shaping this agenda on behalf of women and girls and exploring the links to social protection and social inclusion. We'll be hearing from a distinguished panel of women and men bringing perspectives from a range of different actors and organizations and from different regions of the world. But before I introduce the panel, firstly, I would like to thank the partners behind today's event. We're really pleased to be partnering with ODI, a leading think tank whose evidence and research on gender, climate and economic development is at the forefront of informing these critical policy discussions. And also to thank the Ensure Resilience Global Partnership for Climate and Disaster Risk Finance and Insurance, and specifically the Ensure Resilience Centre of Excellence on Gender Smart Solutions, which is the first global platform to share knowledge, provide guidance to practitioners and promote gender equitable disaster risk management, and who were recognised very importantly for their great work this week with an award. So it's a real privilege to share this platform. And finally, a huge welcome on behalf of the Centre for Disaster Protection, of which I am Associate Director for Engagement. Before we dive into the discussions, a few points on housekeeping. This event will have bilingual English and Spanish simultaneous interpretation. You'll notice on the bottom of your Zoom screen bar that there will be a button for you to choose this, and please select which Zoom channel you wish to listen in, English or Spanish, but note that the event team have warned us not to switch between them, even for those of you who are comfortable in both languages. We are also recording this event both in English and Spanish, and these will be posted to the ODI YouTube channel and shared following the event. We really want you to be joining this discussion and for it to be an active discussion. So after we have had some presentations from our panelists and some introductions, we really encourage you to put forward questions for our panelists using the Q&A function. This is my first time moderating using this Q&A function, so please bear with me, but I hope that it will make for a really rich discussion. There's also the chat function as well, so that you can interact with each other and to keep the discussion live. We'll also be running some quick real-time Zoom polls on the issues to try and take the temperature of the discussions and kind of see where we're at in this virtual room. Now, I'd like to take the opportunity to introduce our expert panel of speakers before I'll be inviting each of them for a short presentation around some of the key questions to kick off our discussion today. So we are really pleased that we are joined here today by Krishnan Narasimhan, the lead specialist and program manager from the United Nations Capital Development Fund. We are also joined by Baroto Natako-Bajira, a gender expert on behalf of the African Risk Capacity, by Bijal Brahmat, the Executive Director of Mahila Housing and Sewa Trust, and also by Letitia Gontijo First Goncalves, risk finance consultant with the World Food Programme and the Regional Bureau for Latin America and the Caribbean. I will beg your forgiveness that I hope that I've correctly pronounced everyone's name, but please do offer corrections as well when you introduce yourself as part of your bios. And at the same time as I'll be inviting the panelists to say a few words, I think that we'll also, our colleagues from ODI will also be launching our real-time first Zoom poll as well. And please respond to that during these initial presentations, and we'll look to see what the answers are. So now I'm going to ask each of the panelists to say a few words to introduce themselves and their bios, but also say a few words on how they are working on pre-agreed disaster finance and how their policy program work aims to benefit women directly. And we'll ask each speaker if you can take around 3 minutes to describe your background and work. And starting with you, Krishnan.
Yeah, thank you very much, Eleanor, and thanks to the organizers for this invitation, and good afternoon, good morning to my fellow panelists and attendees. I represent the UN Capital Development Fund. I am the lead specialist and manage the Pacific Insurance and Climate Adaptation Program. So, as the name suggests, the core of our work is on disaster risk financing and insurance. Specifically the climate disaster risks in the Pacific, but we are seeking to expand to other markets as well where UNCDF operates. So roughly UNCDF works in about 35 countries across Africa, Asia, the Pacific and the Caribbean. The work that we do is primarily to introduce climate disaster risk solutions that target the low-income households. These are presently market-based solutions where we work very closely with aggregators such as cooperatives and associations to and also with the digital service providers for the last mile reach. We have a gender and social inclusions strategy for the program that defines our work in including women and others, including people with disabilities. Some of my responses are going to be based on the gender and social inclusions strategy that we have for the program and that we use in our implementation. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Krishnan, and we're looking forward to hearing more about your work over the course of the discussion. I'd like to now invite Boroto.
Thank you so much, Eleanor. Allow me to thank the organizers of this event for associating the African risk capacity to this side event. Thank you for the partnership. I also want to recognize my fellow panelists. So my name is Boroto Ntakobajira, and I work as the gender expert at the African risk capacity. The African risk capacity, ARC, is a specialized agency of the African Union, established in 2012, and provides African sovereign with capacity building, technical and institutional support for early warning, contingency planning, and management and risk finance. Now, as part of its principles of engagement, ARC adopts a differentiated approach to issues of gender equality. ARC is committed to closing the gender gap, which is central to achieving the Sustainable Development Goals, and thus recognizes that the important role of women in agriculture and in disaster response is essential for food security and economic growth. I consider the promotion of women's empowerment and gender equality in field operation and at the professional level an important factor in creating long-term impacts and sustainability. Accordingly, now the African risk capacity ensures that its operational responses and its capacity building work have a differentiated approach to women and men. Therefore, we systematically build a gender perspective in our operation and policies. So, ARC's gender equality related intervention are guided by gender strategy that was adopted in 2019 and developed in close consultation with partners, stakeholders across the African continent, and globally. This document is a practical step towards ACT's commitment to systematically integrate gender in its intervention. So the main, finally, the main framework for resource mobilization strategy and approach for gender transformative disaster risk management outlined in the gender strategy. And one of the key features of the gender strategy of the African Risk Capacity is the introduction of the gender transformative financing, a concept which led to the creation of the Gender Transformative Fund to support initiatives to transform mentalities and eliminate discriminatory norms and practices, especially at the community level. So as we continue, we will talk more about the Gender Transformative Fund. Thank you so much.
Thank you, and we're delighted that you can join us here today. Now, Bijal, it would be great if you can introduce yourself and your work.
Hello, my name is Bijal Brahmat, and I'm the director of an organization called Mahila Housing Trust. And we are an organization that work directly to build the capacities of poor women in the informal sector across India to improve their housing, living, and working environments. And we work on these issues because we understand that for most women in the informal sector, their house is also their workplace. So it's an asset which, it's not only an asset, but it is also an area which develops their economic productivity. So we work across almost 8 states directly with poor women in India. We have been working specifically, I want to mention, in urban areas because there are multiple solutions available for the rural, but urban areas are much more complex. What we have been trying to do is also build their capacities and develop programs to not only work on disasters like shocks, but also climate related, slow onset but potent disasters like heat stress or say air pollution or water scarcity, which are very evident in urban areas. In our approach, what we do is we build the social capital of these women in slum settlements, which are informal settlements, extremely scientifically. So for example, how do you really demystify what the phenomena of climate change is? Because for most of these poor women, it's merely an act of God. So how do you scientifically demystify and unpack it so that they are able to talk to the governments and private sector in an equal manner? We've built a cadre of about 15,000 women across India. Another thing that I would specifically like to mention is that we do partner with technologists and scientists to give them very disruptive feedback, which ensures very productive collaborations where the technologies get modified in the favor of poor women, and then the poor women adapt those technologies and take finances for that. So for example, poor women have taken 15,000 poor women have, for example, taken housing loans to make their houses either cooler or make them more energy efficient and flood resilient. Very recently, we have also launched pilots on heat and excessive rain, and these are not in the rural. These are women-led, these are for women, designed with the women and in urban areas. So it's heat and excessive rain in complex situations of urban areas. And I'll be talking more about that.
Thank you so much, and we look forward to hearing more. And just before I introduced our final panelist, I know that from the polls shown already, and we're going to ask our colleagues if we can show that again, that we have around 25 or so in the discussion. So I think we should treat this as a small and intimate tent for our discussion, and hopefully we can have a really involved conversation. But we also have representatives from a real mix again of geographies and sectors. So looking forward to your rich insights and contributions as we get to the Q&A section a little bit later. But with that, I will just ask Letitia, our final panelist, to introduce herself and her work with WFP.
Thank you so much. So Thank you, Leonor, and thank you everyone for this organization. I really like the event and the topic. It's something I'm really looking forward for the discussions. My name is Letitia Gonzalez, and I work with WFP, especially in Latin America and the Caribbean, supporting some risk finance pilots and new projects. No, I'll introduce myself in English, but now I'm going to do the introduction in Spanish, so we are inclusive as well. Então, hace desde una década, WFP ha estado implementando soluciones de seguro contra riesgos climáticos como parte de un enfoque integrado de gestión de riesgos para proteger a las comunidades vulnerables.
So I've been working to protect vulnerable communities for many years, and insurance is a very key aspect, and they need to be integrated with other management tools like protecting against climate disasters, improving productivity. So we need to look at opportunities for saving, and we need to make these loans available to households so they can really create productivity. We introduced in Guatemala, Nicaragua, and Salvador some pilot projects in this aspect, and we plan to introduce it in different countries as well in Latin America. So it is important to have an integrated management that also empowers women to improve the situation of women and girls in rural areas, and also food security. So we need really to make all these tools available to them. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Letitia. And I think we're going to dive in now for the next 30 minutes or so into some of the kind of structured questions that our panelists have already had some time to think about and address, and take a bit of a deeper dive on some of the issues to get started with. So the first question is really the framing around why disaster risk finance matters for women, but also other socially disadvantaged groups, and how those disadvantages can often be intersectional, and for us to understand really, you know, how different groups are differentially affected by disasters, and also by the right kind of disaster risk finance interventions if properly tailored. So Krishnan, I'm going to come to you first to help kick us off with this discussion.
Yeah, thank you so much. My responses are going to be anchored on the work that we have been doing in the Pacific around financial inclusion. The UNCDF was leading the Pacific Financial Inclusion Program for over a decade. That eventually gave birth to the Insurance and Climate Adaptation Program. Through these programs, we have conducted extensive primary research as well as a lot of literature review that has informed some of our interventions. And some of the findings from these research suggest the following. That women are most often severely affected by climate disasters than men. This has actually been published as a policy brief on International Women's Day by our implementing partner, the UN University. Women also have less coping mechanisms available to them. This is directly also because they own less bank accounts. There's a gender gap in terms of financial inclusion, and access to other financial instruments like loans are also lesser for women. Not considering these gender differences when implementing disaster risk financing projects has the potential to widen the gender gap that already exists between men and women. This could happen, for example, the products are sold through male-dominated like groups or cooperatives, or by male agents only. Men would have better access then and could purchase them more easily because some of the social norms do not allow, in some societies, do not allow women to directly access these products. So after disaster strikes, more men will receive payouts that will help them in faster recovery, while women may have to resort to certain negative coping mechanisms and strategies like borrowing money or selling assets, which actually, like affect them more, and which will actually make men better off. So while we were developing the products, we took all of this into consideration, and we consulted with several women's groups and actually did a lot of focus group discussions before the products were structured. And as I said earlier, the gender and social inclusion strategy that we have also has a very structured approach and tool to define how we develop disaster risk financing and insurance products. What are the channels through which these are marketed? The partner capacity building in terms of the work that we do with insurance companies and aggregators. How do you sensitize them to look at what women as a significant segment of the market? And this has actually yielded quite some results in the first year itself. This program, as I mentioned, the Pacific Insurance and Climate Adaptation Program, is supported by the governments of Australia, New Zealand, India, and Luxembourg. They also have a very strong gender agenda that we need to fulfill too. So 32% of the beneficiaries that have been covered under the pilot so far are like women, and 5% are people with disabilities, which is quite significant in terms of being fully inclusive. And we hope to reach the 50% target as the implementation progresses. Thanks.
Thank you, Krishnan. And I'm going to invite all panelists to build on each other's answers and help take the discussion forward. And Bijal, perhaps you can also help ground us a bit on the micro level as well and share some of your insights.
Yeah, I would be very happy to give some real life examples to what already Krishnan has said when he said that, women have least access to to sort of resources and assets and information. So first, coming to the poor, in urban areas where we work, most slum settlements are always in topographically vulnerable areas in, where no one will live. What happens then is that if there is some amount of rain, which is normal for the middle income group, these houses will immediately get flooded because just, they are in very shallow areas which are likely to get flooded. Now, when it gets flooded, because for most women, they use it for their economic activities elsewhere, and it is the male who goes outside, the economic productivity is also affected, health is also affected, and there is loss of livelihood too. So, there are multiple sort of losses and damages that the middle class would not usually get. For example, I'll give you one live example. One area in India, one province, which is called Bihar, gets flooded usually every year. And when it gets flooded, all the poor in the slum settlements would climb up to the rooftops, and the women will be the first to get down because they have to clean the muck which has come into the house with the water. And then the death rate of the women increases. And the reason being that when they are cleaning the muck, there are a lot of snakes in the muck which bit the women, and the men are still on top. So it's also the dual care burden which takes its toll on the women. The other thing that, so this is a live example, something very specific to women and girls. I also believe that climate change and disasters caused due to it are intergenerational phenomena. And in some of the developing countries, even in developed countries, I think it is primarily women who are the nurturers of children. And if that has to early on, come in as a habit and as an understanding into the children, into the adolescent girls, it's important that women get sensitized, that they become, the teachers vis-a-vis men. of their children. Again, world over, as Krishnan said, it is the women who are promoting savings. And if there are these small savings, especially with the poor, those are then used to sort of invest towards disaster risk transfer. Also, when a woman actually earns much more and is economically capable, all her income goes towards the betterment of the family. In typical poor families, the male income does not necessarily mean this. So it may be spent in drinking and other kind of vices, which is well known. So this would be my injunction that, the effects are very, very specific to women and girls, and they comprise actually 50% of the informal sector. So in developing countries like India, the informal sector is 80% of the workforce, and of that, women are 50%. So I think they are a very major minority, so to say.
Thank you. And I think it's a really important discussion of the gendered impacts of climate-related extreme weather and other disasters, but also the gendered elements of the coping strategies as well. So perhaps then we can kind of flip the question the other way and look at how we can look at how disaster risk finance instruments can be undertaken in a gender responsive way and ensure that they're socially inclusive. And to kick us off in that discussion, I'm going to invite Barotto.
So thank you so much, Ileana, for giving me the floor. As I mentioned, the African Risk Capacity is an agency that was created by the African Union. And we understand clearly that, as my fellow panelists just mentioned, that when disaster strikes, the people who are the most affected are women, girls, and other vulnerable groups. So because of that, the African Risk Capacity, when it adopted its gender strategy, it introduced what we call transformative financing. This concept led to the creation of the Gender Transformative Fund to support initiatives that transform mentalities and eliminate discriminatory norms and practices, especially at community level. This is very important, really, to talk about eliminating discriminatory norms and practices. Some member states where we work, for example, if I just mention a few, Zimbabwe and Malawi, countries that are prone to cyclones. So the testimonies that we get on the ground are how women are not prioritized when it comes to recovery interventions after a cyclone. Women, of course, they are the persons who are the most vulnerable. But when it comes now to recovery, they are not prioritized. They make the majority. And that's why the African Risk Capacity wanted to transform these mentalities where there are discriminatory norms in societies. Women are discriminated against. Priority most of the time when it comes to those interventions, when it comes even to information, when it comes to recovery, a priority is most of the time given to men. So what we call the introduction of the Gender Transformative Fund is a game changer in ACT's country program. It is the main vehicle for resource mobilization for gender transformative actions among the African Risk Capacity member states and partners. So this fund was established in 2020. And being that vehicle for resource mobilization, it represents the aspiration really for the member states and ACT partners. When we had consultation, we held those consultations to elaborate the gender strategy. And civil society organizations and other partners indicated that desire to, and with the African Risk capacity to transform disasters to positive event through the reconstruction of resilient communities where discriminatory mentalities and attitudes that hinder socio-economic recovery are transformed. Now, the Gender Transformative Fund is a very innovative and non-classical fund dedicated to gender transformative issues in the disaster risk management fields. And it's clearly an appropriate solution. It's an open basket for country-specific resource mobilization for the funding of action and initiatives capable of transforming gender discriminatory mentalities in member states. The ACT's Gender Transformative Fund is embedded in some objectives of the ACT Gender Strategy, especially Objective 3, and its specific objective is to ensure gender transformation. So this will be done through, and it's done already in some countries through the provision of support to activities capable of transforming mentality, gender discriminatory norms and practices, especially at micro and meso levels at community, advocacy for equal power, campaigns against systemic discrimination, harmful norms and practices. So I can mention a case. We held a policy dialogue in Zimbabwe in January, and we brought together different stakeholders, a government, and we held a donor roundtable where there was a clear commitment, because we want to have funds that are ready when there are where there is a disaster that strikes. We don't want people to start grappling. But if it's possible to have a fund that's available, like the basket fund, that can cater for the needs now of the communities, that can empower women on the ground. If you have that fund, that's already where people come and bring different contributions. So when disaster strikes, people don't need again to ask what's happening, but there is already a fund that's available. So we got really the buy-in from different stakeholders, including government and donors who came on board. And we think that this implementation starting in Zimbabwe will also be duplicated in other member states in Eastern and Southern Africa and Western and Central Africa. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Baroto. And I think a really good illustration of the importance of how we engage and take stakeholders along with us on this journey, and the need to get everyone around the table. I'm going to invite Letitia now to give us the perspective as well of how can we ensure these instruments are undertaken in a gender responsive and even gender transformative way, and to give us the perspective from Panama.
Gracias. Sí, yo creo que es súper interesante los puntos abarcados por los colegas.
I think it is very interesting. And in Latin America, we have, in 2020, we launched a new strategy and also a new gender policy to make sure that everything is socially inclusive. So some specific examples, when we talk about specific cases, we can see that many more countries can prove that microinsurance is being very positive and very important for women's autonomy. And it is very important to organize this type of insurance. Last week, we did a presentation and we explained the cases of 4 women and how they could use this money. So we had a woman in Malawi, and Kadija, we had Linda from Guatemala. We also had Denise, a mother from Madagascar, and Maria from Nicaragua, a rural family in Nicaragua. So these 4 women, despite their differences, they have had to face meteorological extreme phenomena, and these funds help them not just to survive, but also to recover. So economic empowerment, the property, the funds that you get. These are things that are easy to measure. However, there are other elements that are more difficult to measure, like decision making, that is very difficult to assess. So it is very important to listen to specific cases so that we can adapt the programs, and those are then able to change lives. It is not easy to have specific measurements, but yes, it is very clear that we need to be gender inclusive and socially inclusive when we design these policies, so that these policies can really respond to the needs of real people and really produce results. I think it is very crucial to listen to the persons, because it helps us assess if we are designing the correct programs, the correct insurances. Thank you.
Thank you, Letitia. And I think you've really raised such a critical point of how we best listen, inform, and engage directly with women's groups and with affected women themselves, and ensure that programs are adaptive in response, and that policies are also adaptive in response in that way. I think I'm going to invite Krishna now to help us maybe take the discussion forward one notch. And how do we best engage directly with affected women themselves, with women's groups and women advocates, and what those kind of entry points are for getting the right people at the table to achieve more socially inclusive risk financing.
Yeah, thank you once again, Eleanor. So from the point of view of our programming, we sort of adopt a market systems approach where we firmly believe that in the power of partnerships. So UNCDF is like a catalyst where we work with different sections of the market, be it the supply side, be it the demand side, as well as those on the policy side, including the regulators. So what we do is that we bring these partners together, and using our tools and instruments that include certain types of financial interventions like performance-based grants and other blended financing instruments, we de-risk some of the work that the private sector has a very critical role to play in this. And when such disaster risk financing solutions are developed, we have recognized quite early on the importance of need to meet with women and groups that work with women. And we also recognize the importance of our partners, namely the insurance companies, the other financial service providers, the digital service providers, the fintech service providers, on their need for a human-centric approach, especially when it comes to developing solutions for women. So this includes, finding out what perils affect them and their what businesses the most. How are their families and their livelihoods affected by natural hazards and by disasters? And what type of support do they need most after a disaster? And at present, what sort of access they have to financial instruments, to even say mobile phones, their present status, and what financial instruments and technologies are they comfortable using, and what would be the type of training interventions that they would like to be exposed. So these are the various factors that we use while designing products, devising the marketing and awareness strategies, the outreach strategies, and also determining which distribution channel will reach them better. I mean, for example, in our work, we consult regularly with institutions such as the Femlink Pacific, the Fiji Women's Fund, the Ministry of Women, etc. So all these factors need to be evaluated when investigating the effectiveness of these products. And it is important that all our implementing partners are sensitized to these issues. We have technically capacitated all our partners to look at this very critically while devising their strategies for intervention. Thanks.
Thank you. I think that's a really some really key points about moving beyond outreach and consultation to a real human and woman-centered design approach, and the importance of sensitizing implementing partners as well. I'm going to invite Bijal now to talk a bit more about co-creation in a meaningful way, and how this can be best conducted with affected women themselves.
Yeah, just two examples. One is that we really do believe that very scientific phenomena, the larger world wants to keep it all the more scientific. So how do you, for example, unpack very abstract scientific term like systems thinking to the poor women who are not educated, we sort of, so for example, what we did is we were trying to explain to them the water scarcity phenomena which happens due to climate change, and that unless and until you address all the elements of the system, there will not be much impact on that stress. So we sat with the scientists and we prepared a water cycle, and which had various elements like, say, evaporation, runoff, absorption of water, how it affects water table, and then probably again evaporation. And those elements were actually put on cards, and the cards were then put on a rope, and women held all the cards through the ropes. And if one end of the rope was pulled, then all the other end of the ropes got pulled. So we try to pull. So we try to gamify very, very scientific and abstract approaches to be able to, sort of build their capacities to talk at an equal level with the governments and the technologies. One of the other things that we have trying to do is ensure disruptive collaborations with the technologies. For example, we were trying to promote cool roofs, because heat is a great climate stress, which is going to sort of unravel across the entire world, but more so in the global south, including India. So the technologist had a cool roof, and we piloted it into the houses of women. We taught them how to take readings from temperature loggers and compare it to the Indian Meteorological Department's readings every day. And then, so they started noting it every day, and then they understood that the roof was really, very useful. So then they themselves became the mouthpieces for promoting that technology. Then they, with us, they developed a financial loan mechanism, and then took a complete loan, and it was then upscaled. So I think the scientists, the technologists, and the governments also need to hear and listen and learn. You have to unlearn what you have already learned. And also the other thing, especially in terms of when you are talking not only about savings and credit, but also about insurance, I have understood by working with poor women that because money is so crucial and so short, they always think in terms of investment. They don't think of insurance as a risk transfer mechanism. They say, okay, I'm investing my money in a premium, what benefit am I getting? So we have to undertake a lot of education and hand-holding and keep reiterating it again and again to be able to, sink in the fact that it's a risk transfer and you cannot expect benefits from it. So I think these are some of the strategies that we have been undertaking very hands-on with them to be, and these are some of the challenges also.
Thank you so much. And I can see that we're starting to get some initial questions in the Q&A. So I'm going to invite one more of the panelists just to give some further remarks. But if you want to start including your questions in the Q&A, then we'll soon move to an open discussion. Krishnan, if I can get you to hold off on answering this question just now firstly, I'm just going to ask Letitia for her kind of final response in terms of how we kind of engage the women's rights and advocacy community most productively in influencing and shaping responsible disaster risk finance products.
Thank you, Eleanor. Sí, muy interesante las discusiones. Estoy aquí a pensar un poco cómo...
I think the debate is very interesting. I think the part of strategic partnerships is very important. But I think the best way women can contribute to this agenda is to influence the offer of this type of insurance. For example, micro insurance that is specific to women, and that is a big opportunity because it is centered in women and is promoted through channels like cooperatives that are linked to women, and that is a very powerful way of getting to women. So we need to coordinate this, and it needs to be regulated, and there needs to be the right policies, but we need to really know the demand, what the real demand is. And the organizations know the risk, they know the barriers, and they know what they need to address. In Latin America, what we did is to really listen to the organizations, like grassroots organizations, so that we could really assess what the main risks were. Also work together with financing institutions and organizations. And we need to explain all these abstract concepts in a way that they are understood and they can adapt to each specific need. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I've often heard it said that a good event or panel discussion should be like a good dinner party. And I feel at the moment we're certainly getting some really exciting energy and some really, really grounded examples from our panelists. So thank you for your focus and energy today. And I think we're going to move into the Q&A section. And the first question that we have is from Libby Como on how can a poor woman afford an insurance premium for an insurance policy that can effectively remediate her impact from a disaster. And I think this question as to who pays is really, really critical. And I'm going to invite Krishnan, who's put his hand up first, to take the first go at answering this.
Yeah, thank you, Eleanor. So from our experience of working on micro insurance and now on this climate disaster risk insurance, this is a very pertinent question. So repeatedly in many of our demand side studies, we have found that the three main A's, as we call it, that affect or rather, I mean, are causes for poor insurance penetration is lack of access, lack of awareness, and lack of affordability. A. So affordability is very key, and even if you provide access and even if you provide digital access and you do interventions like what Bijal said around increasing awareness and financial capacity building through financial literacy and insurance literacy particularly, what affordability still becomes a big challenge. So one of the ways that we are working with the private sector to make the products affordable is through group aggregation, because one of the biggest costs in insurance is the distribution, the cost of distribution. If we can bring this down, then that reduces the premium. So the group aggregation model, where the aggregators like cooperatives and other associations and groups that work with women take the administrative burden of distribution that effectively brings down the cost. And we de-risk some of these initial costs by setting up the projects so that such distribution channels can thrive. The second way is smart subsidies for premium financing. And this is being quite well promoted by some of the donors, where based on a sustainability plan which kicks in 2-3 years from now, such groups can be introduced with smart subsidies, which link the subsidy, which could be 30 to 50% of the premium cost, to their behavioral change. The number of trainings they attend, number of capacity building events that they attend, and the regularity with which they start saving. So if that is linked, then in a matter of 2 to 3 years, they save enough to keep paying for their premiums. So these are some of the approaches that we have taken. Thanks.
Thank you. And I'm going to invite Bijal to build on your answer there.
Yeah, I think Krishnan has answered that very well, but I would still say that no single approach, as I said, will solve the equation, because it's very, very complex. And so you have to undertake all these approaches. So for example, we are able to do this because we are a women's cooperative, but the insurance is still at the meso level. So the cooperative buys it. It's not the poor women who are buying it. And then we then bundle it with other things like, as he said, like savings mechanism, or probably life insurance or livelihood insurance or other kinds of insurances, so that the cost goes down. However, you must understand that even in a developing country like India, the entire insurance coverage is around 7%, which would include the middle class and the educated. And for the poor, there are primarily only two kinds of insurances available, which is life insurance and accident insurance, very, very heavily subsidized. The premium is extremely subsidized by the government. So this is still a challenge, and therefore we need to use education, awareness, multiple financial instruments, including smart subsidies. So we shouldn't be looking towards completely commercializing it now and then, and therefore a lot of learnings should be coming around across from the world. But I think women have become ready to invest if you have built trust over a long period of time, and they have come out a little bit above the poverty and have some extra income to be able to invest in there. And yeah, so for example, recurring savings or fixed deposits are a certain way in which some of the insurance premium gets funded too. So, and most microfinance institutions would only offer credit. So you have to have, smaller microfinance institutions offering a complete range of financial services to service the premium.
Thank you. And while we wait for some further questions to come in, I'm going to invite Barotto and then Letitia to the discussion.
So thank you so much, Elena. Mine is a quick one. I think in our communities in Africa, I'm going to agree with
Sí,
Bijal.
obviamente estoy de acuerdo con Bijal y con
I'm
todo lo que han
agreeing with
dicho.
Bijal regarding raising awareness about insurance. The African Risk Capacity has been given the mandate to capacitate member states. And it's very important to capacitate communities. People are not even educated when it comes to insurance. They don't know what it is, how to afford it, how to claim it. So we work closely with some organizations on the ground that are focusing strictly to capacitate women, to raise awareness, to educate them about insurance. And I think this is a very important step in our communities on the African continent, where many people don't even are not educated when it comes to insurance. Maybe even if it's for small farmers, can be for cooperatives. So it's important first to raise awareness. So I'm really the tendency to agree with Bijal. Thank you so much.
Letitia, I'll invite you to respond, and then I have some of my own questions, and then hopefully we'll get some more coming in as well.
No, thank you. No, and I just wanted to agree. No, one in the awareness and also the demand. Usually, when you do like the focus group discussions before implementing like any pilot, we always assess the willingness to pay or the affordability that the product. So sometimes even when you don't even believe, people are willing to contribute when you explain, how it works. But of course, the smart subsidy, sometimes it's necessary when we start a pilot and you have to show in a way to people how it will work and they can perceive the value of the product. And we also work with different, let's say, clients or beneficiaries. Some of them actually cannot afford. And we hope that as insurance is just one piece of the puzzle, so you can build the resilience over time and hopefully in a few years' time, they can afford to pay. So that's why the subsidy is very important. But we can also perceive that some of them, they just need to understand why and how it works. Because in Latin America, it's often you listen to people, they believe insurance is something for the rich. They don't believe this is something that the poor can afford. So I think this is also very important. And also the asset creation. WFP works a lot with the asset creation modality as well. So people can work a few days and they can pay the premium in that way. So they can create also, they can do like restoration, water resources and things like that. So they can build their own resilience and at the same time, they are contributing to the premium in that way. So that's my contribution. Thank you.
Thank you. And I see we have another question coming in from Mary, but first I'm going to pose a question to take us up to the kind of macro level and ask the panelists what you see as the greatest policy barriers currently in the way to preventing pre-agreed finance, of which insurance is one element, from really being the kind of default, and how we shift and ensure the right policy incentives are there. So I will ask panelists if you can use the raise hand function, perhaps, and see who wants to kick off this discussion. Oh, everybody's engaged. Krishnan, first to you.
Yeah, so thanks. The policy environment or the enabling environment is very, very important, because there are instances of women not being able to access some of these services just because they do not have the essential, documents or IDs that can provide them access. So there have been certain policy initiatives where women need to produce less documents, because at times they are not owners of assets, they don't have land titles or building titles with them, which actually prevent them from getting credit or getting some other type of financial instruments. So that needs a very robust policy intervention, both at the regulatory level and at the government level. So I think that could be a good starting point, and we have seen instances of many governments being a little responsive or a little proactive in doing that, having recognized the importance of gender inclusion. Thanks.
Thank you. And Barotto, I saw that your hand was up but has gone down, but do you have anything you want to add on either the policy barriers or what we think are some of the policy solutions that can help unlock this?
So when I mentioned the Gender Transformative Fund, it's very important because they want to empower the ministries of gender or women which are less resourced. That's very important, because if you work and you push for the empowerment of those ministries of gender in each country, that will be important at policy level. But also at regional level, the African Risk Capacity works with the African Union. So in the recent, concluded high-level meeting on disaster and risk reduction in Nairobi in November, so there was a declaration that's very important when it comes to DRM, gender, DRM, and financing. And that declaration, when you go through it, it calls for member states and regional economic communities to increase the annual budgetary allocation, as well as to establish innovative financing solutions, including by participating in the African Risk Capacity's innovative risk pooling mechanism for the implementation of gender sensitive and inclusive disaster risk reduction strategies, programs, and plan of action. So it's important from our side to work with, when we try to implement the Gender Transformative Fund, we work with the Ministry of Gender. We call for its empowerment, but also at the regional level, we work with the African Union. And we think that we are making really steps at that level. Thank you.
Thank you, and Bijal as well. Oh, Bijal, did you also want to respond on the policy question?
Sorry.
No problem.
So the situation in India actually is that, first of all, I think in such financial instruments, gender is not at all in discussion. So gender is not the focus. Again, I think the gap and the lack of innovative thinking in India is that if it's a financial instrument, it has to absolutely go through the micro or the insurance industry, for example, or the financial ministry, vis-a-vis, something like a gender ministry or a climate change ministry, which would be much more open to such innovations. So I think there's a very rigid structured path that we have been following. Thirdly, even in our country, regarding disaster and climate change, there is a lot of education to be undertaken even at the the very highest levels of the government and the financial industry, because most of the climate change talk is still only looking at mitigation aspects. It's not looking at adaptation and risk transfer. I do believe insurance or financing is something which has to be tackled from all aspects. So how do you really bring all of them to talk, to become innovative, and to talk about women? I think so we really do talk about it globally, and we also, we are working with Inchu Resilient quite a lot now with their Center for Excellence, Gender Center for Excellence, trying to talk to the governments and trying to see that, there is more innovation brought in. And one of the biggest policy inputs that we are trying to give to the insurance authority in India is that allow poor women's own institution to set up their, insurance companies and make special provisions for such companies which are owned by poor women to be able to really, set up an example and scale. I think it's a lot, while it's more about financing, and people do talk of scaling up and sustainability. Like Krishnan said, everyone is giving smart subsidies. So why not innovate and put it in the hands of these women as leaders, along with some professionals, to see how we can come up and address the issue in a different manner. I think these are some of the policy gaps and injunctions we have been trying to make.
Thank you. And I can see Letitia is also looking to respond. So I'll invite you here. And now we also have another couple of questions for the panel. But Letitia, on the policy side.
Thank you. No, I think very quickly, just to complement, I think especially in the context of Latin America, no, we discuss it a lot actually with the superintendencies, because there's a lot of limitations sometimes in the regulation, let's say, to, like Krishna was saying about some women don't have maybe some documents, access to, land documents as well. So it can sometimes limit it. And the insurance, we know it has to be simple. The distribution is actually a very big part of the cost, and also all the paperwork, everything that you have to handle. Sometimes the flexibility from the superintendents in the regulation, it's not there. And we have to often discuss it with them as well, so we can have some flexibility or even simplification. Not always keeping in mind the consumer protection. Of course, we want to make sure the beneficiaries are aware and they are very well know what they're getting. But sometimes it's very important to be flexible and simplify, less documents, some things that you can even like make it more like comic books, like we did in, let's say, in Latin America, without too much writing, but in a way that people can understand. But sometimes you still have to keep all that countless number of policies that you have to handle to people. So all of that, I think it's very important. That's to have an open dialogue with the superintendents, to have let's say, a good regulation that fits our beneficiaries' objectives as well. Thank you.
Thank you. It's a really rich answer. And we have another question that's come in through the Q&A function. I'm not able to see whose name it is, unfortunately, but an open question to any of the panelists to respond to. What are the specific ways that we can assess whether a financial instrument is effective at addressing the gender gap in practice? And I know that we've talked about the complexities of measurement throughout the discussions, but it would be good if we can build on that.
Well, I can say something.
Go ahead, Letitia, get us started.
I think it's a very good question, because it's a very difficult answer. No, it's not easy. Like I said also in my intervention, it's not easy. Some things are very easy are tangible, you can easily access, others are not. So I think the best way you can access is like having right indicators, of course, having this open, a constant follow-up with the beneficiaries, like having qualitative information as well, like the examples that Bijal was giving. It's like you cannot get it through numbers. No, you have to have this qualitative approach. And that's the reason we are like doing this publication we just launched last week, because we wanted to hear how women are using the payouts. Is it really making a difference in their lives? Like, is it really, they have a say on how they spend it? All of that, I think it's quite important. So it's a complex answer because we don't have really a ready-made formula. But I think it's a mix of qualitative, and of course in the product design you have to try to address as much as you can all the important points. But yeah, I think it's an ongoing process until we can answer something like that.
Bijal, do you want to build on that?
Yeah, so I think the first and foremost and the easiest, because as she said, it's very, very complex, is that you involve the women in the design, and then also probably in the delivery, you involve the women and also make women customers. I think these are the three things you can very easily foremost address to ensure that the gender gap is closed. But beyond that, as she said, this is a complex problem. We are all learning. If we do address the gender gap, we may not be able to scale. So there will indefinitely be, challenges of scale. And because insurance is a market instrument, whether it's marketable or not. So, such challenges are there, and we have to continuously keep deploying the products and keep improving based on the feedback. I think that's the only way.
Thank you. And we have another question from Maria ODI in terms of if any of the panelists have any specific ideas about design and implementation of pre-agreed disaster finance in gender responsive ways, specifically for displaced migrant, refugee, or demographically dynamic populations. And if there are particular concerns or considerations there. I'm also, before inviting the panelists to respond to that, going to check with our AV team. I see that we have a comment from a participant from Niger who would also like to share some of the challenges from their own context. So Malika, we'll have a see as to whether we're able to do that. But first, I'll see if any of the panelists want to respond on how this works for people on the move or people who've been displaced. I see no hands going up, so we may take that offline, and I'm sure that amongst our organizations and networks we can try and come back, and we hope to both share the videos of this recording but looking into a follow-up blog or paper. So any questions we're not able to answer right now we'll definitely take away. I will just see if we are able to. I'm not sure that we're able to open the technology for you to present, Malika, but again it would be great for us to follow up and to share with the participants of today's discussions the example and some of the challenges and also the approach that you're taking in Niger. Perhaps if we don't have any more particular questions forthcoming right now, I might actually invite Mary from ODI to share some of the reflections and from the discussions that we've heard today, and then perhaps we might go back to our panelists again for their final reflections before we wrap up.
Thank you very much, Eleanor, and hello, everyone. I'm Marie Dupart, a Senior Technical Advisor in ODI's Global Risks and Resilience Programme. We convened today's event, the pre-agreed disaster finance, the agenda women's advocates should be influencing, because it's such an immensely important agenda where, in general, until now, the voices of women, of gender equality advocates, and the interests of other socially disadvantaged groups have been too quiet. Although today's panelists, as you can see and hear, are absolutely on the leading edge of designing pre-agreed disaster risk finance to progress gender equality. As we've heard today, pre-agreed disaster finance in its essence refers to financial mechanisms and systems that are lined up and ready to activate when there are indicators that a crisis could emerge. The finance is dispersed to avert or alleviate a humanitarian crisis. So the kinds of pre-agreed finance that we're talking about and which have been illustrated today are things like insurance at different scales or humanitarian disbursements to governments and organizations on the basis of triggers, which could include, but they're not limited to, forecasts for extreme weather and climate conditions and their anticipated impacts on communities. And we've heard today about how the UN system and multilateral aid and development agencies are increasingly starting to pivot towards setting up pre-agreed disaster finance. So they're not caught on the back foot when crisis threatens, but they can be nimble and fast acting. International NGOs too are taking the cue and committing to pre-agreed humanitarian financing also. Now, pre-agreed disaster finance has immense potential to help people, as we've heard, individuals, households, communities, but it also has the potential to be far less effective than it could be if it's designed in a technocratic way or indeed a gender-blind way, and is so much focused on financial modelling that it fails to adequately respond to the perspectives and grounded needs of diverse people. And let's just emphasise that here we recognise that women are not a homogeneous group, and we're really talking about social inclusion more broadly here, including the specific needs of urban versus rural women, as we've heard, people living with disabilities, diverse ethnic groups, castes, classes, and so on. And we've also really reflected a bit today about how disaster risk finance would be less effective if it fails to respond to learning from implementation. And it's those women's experiences from implementation too, which are so vital. A potential risk that concerns me generally is that in most societies, women's labour in the care economy is invisible. It's not adequately valued in social terms or explicit economic terms. As Bijal said earlier, women are in the majority employed in informal sectors of the economy in low income and middle income countries. And of course, we know that women are underrepresented in decision making in virtually every society. These are different forms of underrepresentation and invisibility. For this reason, actually, pre-agreed disaster risk financing is really exciting, a vital new frontier where the women's movement and gender equality advocates everywhere, female, male, and non-binary, should be looking to influence. And in today's discussion, you've heard from champions for gender equality, sitting in various institutions, which really have an open door for collaboration with local, national, and international gender experts and women's groups. You've heard from the UN Capital Development Fund, Africa Risk Capacity, the World Food Programme, who all have an open door. Please take advantage of that. They've told you how they're not only open to ideas, but also to offering different forms of capacity development to women and women's groups so they can benefit more. And you've heard from the Mahila Housing Sewa Trust, which actually has turned this on its head and said, listen, we're open to educating governments and scientists about women's priorities at the community level. they are demonstrating that dynamic potential of advocacy influencing learning and doing together, which are so powerful. And at least two of the sponsoring organizations for this event, the Center for Disaster Protection and the Issue Resilience Center of Excellence for Gender Smart Solutions, I know will be actively looking to expand connections with gender experts around the world to assist them with their advisory and other work in various countries. So for this reason too, please get in touch either in the chat or following the event, and because we look forward to building our networks with you. And finally, before I sign off and hand back to Eleanor and the panelists, I want to say a very special thank you about the organization of this event, because of course we've had our wonderful moderator, Eleanor, and I've also helped pull it together, but a shout out to Anastasia Tomaides of the Issue Resilience Center for Excellence, who was instrumental in organizing it as well. I'm now going to ask my colleague at ODI to put up another Zoom poll, which the audience can fill out just to see what you learned, what you take away from the event. And you can fill that out as you're listening to the panelists' final remarks. Please also share your reflections, as you have been doing, in the chat box. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mary. And we've been informed that Malika, your microphone should be enabled. So we'd love to invite you to share some
Malika, nos gustaría mucho poder escuchar qué es lo que tienes que decir y que puedas compartir tus reflexiones sobre el trabajo que habéis estado realizando en Níger. Muchas gracias, Malika. Nos encantaría escuchar lo que tienes que decir y que puedas compartir el trabajo que habéis estado realizando.
Eleanor, you're muted.
Thank you, Christian. I was just checking, Malika, if you're able to hear us and share some of your reflections, and if not, then we'll invite you to share some in writing that we can include as part of the wrap up. In which case, I think let's maybe hear our final concluding remarks from our panelists, and a huge thank you again for all of you for joining today. Krishnan, do you want to share your concluding remarks?
Yes, so thank you, Eleanor. Thank you, panelists. It was really insightful, and especially the panel brought people from Africa, Latin America, Asia, and the Pacific. So that itself was a good learning opportunity in terms of what is happening in the other parts of the world, which could inform key lessons for us. So I'm, all for continuing this conversation both offline and online quite frequently, because there's a lot as a community of practice that we need to learn from each other in terms of being responsible, in terms of expanding the scope for gender and social inclusion in all our efforts towards building the financial preparedness and resilience of say disadvantaged people and low-income societies. So thank you very much for this opportunity to share my thoughts and what my program is doing. So thank you very much. Yeah.
Thank you, Christian. And I think building this as a broader community of practice is a great challenge to all of us. Barotto, would you like to share your final thoughts from the discussion today?
Yes, let me thank the fellow panelists. Thank you so much for giving this opportunity to the African Risk Capacity to be part of this event. So we know that we are already working in partnership with Issue Resilience, and this discussion will continue. We look forward to extending more on this topic. So from our side, we want to just to bring up the Gender Transformative Fund that the African Risk Capacity has put forward to member states. When this fund is established, it will focus on advocacy for a gender transformative DRM policy environment, build back better rehabilitation activities, income generation activities, and quick wins activities. So the African Risk Capacity, as the question that came before, to know how we check, how we make sure to know that which approach is working financially. I was tempted to show how the African Risk Capacity goes, because we start from doing a gender analysis in member states, then that leads to a gender action plan, and that leads to a policy brief, and then finally it leads to a round table now where we discuss the establishment of the Gender Transformative Fund. So that process goes on, and we always have time again later to check how things are going on the ground, what is successful, what is working, what's not working. And if need be, again, we can return to research like my colleagues mentioned today. So thank you so much. We look forward to exchanging more, to continuing this conversation on other platforms. Thank you so much.
Thank you, and we're so pleased that you could join us here today. Bijal, any final reflections from you?
Yeah, so thank you so much for giving this opportunity. And but I would like to, just make one or two submissions. Is that we need everything. We need, policy influence. We need the markets to be able to, bring in a lot of change, a lot of equations, and bring in a lot of stakeholders to be able to resolve this. But I think what we need to encourage the most are the champions of change and action in whatever way that we can, who are working at the ground level and perhaps directly with women and those who are most socially disadvantaged. So what are the opportunities that they get for, interaction, for, developing further, is something that is very crucial to me. And so thank you once again for giving us this platform, ODI and INSEE Resilience. But I think also what we do not understand, because some of these, resource funds like the Gender Transformative Fund in Africa or the UNFCT Fund are probably introduced at a very top or high level in countries. And champions like us do not understand how to access them or how to reach out or probably even make a knowledge partnership. And that is something I think is a very huge gap, between the ground and at the top. And I think we really need to sort of take initiatives to be able to promote such exchanges, which will encourage more and more partnership between the ground and the very sort of higher level.
I think there's an excellent challenge, and nice to have specific actions for us to go away with and follow up. Letitia, I'll invite you for any closing thoughts.
Well, thank you so much, and I also would like to thank the opportunity. That it was a super interesting discussion, like with people from different regions, so it is always insightful to see what are the differences and also what we can adapt to our region. And I just would like to highlight also how important it is, I think, the role of the associations and cooperatives. I think we cannot never highlight it enough. Like our projects in Central America as WFP has been always linked to the cooperative and the associations. They are always our starting point, let's say. It's where the aggregation of all the farmers, let's say, or even like the micro entrepreneurs. So it's very important. And the enabling environment, like having regulation in place, but also having the willingness, not only from government, but the private sector, and also the technical part. Sometimes, let's say, the insurance company in the country cannot have maybe the technical capacity to design something, let's say, different, like a parametric insurance, something like that. And I think it's very important the role of the donors as well, and also all the other international organizations to support this capacity building in the country. So, but thank you so much for the opportunity. We're looking forward for the discussions after that. And yeah, we're open for questions as well. If you want, we can post the emails and we can share as well the publication that I think it replies a bit answer a bit some of the main questions that we discussed today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Letitia. And just echoing Mari's point earlier as well about this being the start of a conversation and a commitment to keep doors open. And certainly for me, I'm really hoping that I will still be attending, whether it's virtually or in person, CSW events in the next 10 years to come, now that I've marked my first decade. But we will be sure to write up some of the rich insights from today's discussions, some of the contributions, both from our panelists, but also from participants. And I know we have, Mari has shared her email address there as well. And that you will all receive a follow-up communication from ODI as well, with a link to the event recording in English and Spanish. Thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedules, especially across multiple time zones. And just another big thank you, especially to our partners at the Ensure Resilience Centre of Excellence on Gender Smart Solutions, for really helping curate this discussion. And a huge thank you to all of our panelists. Let's ensure that we're actively following up and that this is the start of the conversation. Thank you, everyone.